Hey everybody, how's it going today? It's your boy Cyclical back with another Naruto discussion video. Today we're going to go over how Raikage A and Killer B would do against the 4 different teams in the Akatsuki. Real quick, I do want to shout out that this video was actually recommended to me by one of my viewers, so Braxton, if you're watching this one's for you. Thanks so much for the interesting topic, and if anyone else has something you want to see covered on my channel, feel free to leave it in the comments below this video. I likely won't be able to do them all, but I would certainly be interested to know what you all want to see. With that out of the way, let's get right into today's topic. The first thing I want to make clear is about the frame of mind I'll be approaching this series of fights from. While I'll still be using various feats and things to reinforce my claims throughout this video, I want to reiterate something I've said in the past, that the power scaling in Naruto is likely much more narrow than many people assume it to be. This isn't to say anything so extreme as that your average genin would stand a chance against a jonin. The opposite of this is actually expressly shown at the beginning of the manga. What I do mean though is that some of the higher tier fighters should be a bit more similar than many people give them credit for. For example, and especially relevant to this video, the middle members of the Akatsuki are likely all relative to each other to some degree, and so whenever someone claims that one of the Akatsuki's members would stomp or no-diff one of its others, it kinda makes me question the whole argument. This isn't something I think needs to be heavily focused on in most instances. People either acknowledge that a fight is close or it isn't most of the time, but in one specific matchup today, it is going to be a very important concept to keep in mind as I share my thoughts about the fight. So first up to bat, we have Hidon and Kakuzu versus A and B, and while this may seem immediately contradictory to what I was just finishing saying, the zombie duo stands no chance against the guys from the Hidden Cloud. While Kakuzu's strength is a lot more debatable than Hidon's, Hidon is the self-proclaimed weakest Akatsuki members. I personally think that Kakuzu is the second weakest member of the group as well, and so as long as you don't think that A or B would lose to the bottom 2 members of the Akatsuki individually, then there shouldn't be any reason to believe that they would lose the duo fight either. Quickly though, I will evidence some of the reasons why Hidon and Kakuzu would lose and why it would be no contest. While Hidon is functionally immortal, he's shown to be relatively slow and is limited to close quarters combat, and in this encounter he would be up against 2 incredibly fast shinobi who specialize in close quarters combat. On top of this, the Raikage has his lightning cloak, which nearly completely stops Sasuke's Chidori and could most likely protect him from even being damaged by Hidon's scythe in the first place. Killer B could probably outdo Hidon in a contest of swordplay, since he was able to put the moves on Mangekyo Sharingan Sasuke, but even if Hidon does manage to draw some of B's blood, B can probably use the chakra of the 8 tails to regenerate any wounds Hidon would inflict on him, just like how Naruto can use Kurama's chakra to heal himself. In any case, Hidon's main ability basically gets reduced to a non-factor in this fight, and he's simply not winning in a straight fight against someone who's so much stronger than the type of ninja we have seen him directly struggle against. In Kakuzu's case, we can once again argue that either A's lightning cloak or B's tailed beast chakra might be able to protect him against Kakuzu's attacks, but then Kakuzu also has some impressive durability. In fact, it's one of the core assets of his fighting style, but unfortunately for Kakuzu, he's also not going to be fast enough to keep up with either B or the Raikage, since the Raikage is the fastest ninja alive through most of the entire series, and B was able to keep pace with guys like Kakashi, who are shown to pretty blatantly keep up with Kakuzu. I don't think most people would argue that Kakuzu's fast enough to keep up with them anyway, which means that he's going to be forced to try and tank the attacks of at least one of the 2 opponents, and this isn't going to go well for him. See, Killer B and the Raikage both regularly incorporate lightning style into their attacks, B with his swords and the Raikage with his lightning cloak, and so they should be able to tear right through Kakuzu's diamond hardening with ease. So the chances are slim that the immortal duo would even be able to injure A and B in the first place, and since B and A so neatly counter how Hidon and Kakuzu function, I think it's safe to say that this round goes pretty cleanly to the Cloud duo. Next up, I have Itachi and Kisame versus the Terrible Twosome, and this one is similarly one-sided in my opinion. I won't spend too much time on this one either, since I think most people are probably going to agree with what I'm about to say. We've already seen a direct fight between two of the characters involved here, and in that fight we saw that Kisame made incredibly light work of Killer Bee. Of course, Bee couldn't use his full power for fear of injuring Sabu and Ponta, but even so, Kisame seemed to be having no trouble combating Bee's regular arsenal. He nearly sucked Killer Bee dry of chakra with just a few swings from Samehada, and while he probably wouldn't survive being hit directly with the Tailed Beast Bomb, he might be able to absorb it something like that with the Super Shark Bomb. After all, we do get to see that Kisame managed to capture Roshi without Itachi's help, and so we know that he's capable of fighting off a full-powered Jinchuriki on his own. In Itachi's case, we also know that Killer Bee lost directly to Amaterasu, and that the Raikage had to sacrifice an arm to avoid being one-shot by the same technique. A could dodge this, of course, but if he does get hit by it, then he is definitely a goner. The Raikage also couldn't break through the Sasuke's Susanoo, and since Itachi's Susanoo is even more impressive than Sasuke's is, it should protect him even better against the Raikage. You might be able to argue that Bee could resist the Tsukiyomi, though I'd personally disagree with that, and there's really no way to argue that the Raikage could defend himself from it, and so without going too deep into the weeds about all of the possible interactions that could happen between Itachi's jutsu and those of the tag team, I'll just remind everybody that Itachi is pretty clearly implied to be stronger than the same Sasuke who nearly managed to kill the Raikage, and so he should simply scale above his opponents here. In short, the fight between Itachi and Kisame and A and B comes down to the idea that A and B are fighting against people who they have either already lost to, or who are stronger than people that they've already lost to. With no clear answers to the types of things that Itachi can do, and with the added pressure of having Kisame around, I think it would simply be too much for them to handle. Moving on, we have Pain and Conan to talk about. Just like with Itachi and Kisame, I don't think there's all that much to talk about here. Conan is already a strong fighter in her own right, though I don't think I really even need to talk about her much to claim that Pain could probably beat A and B in a fight on his own. Pain is the type of fighter who people regularly pit against the 5 Kage or the 3 Sannin all at once. I myself even made a video about the latter topic, and despite my own claim that Pain would lose to the Sannin, I still had plenty of people debating me that he would win definitively. I even went so far as to claim that it would be a hard battle for the Sannin to win, and that if something as hard-hitting as the Chibaku Tensei comes out, that they'd all lose. I think the same is true for A and B concerning the Chibaku Tensei, and I seriously hope that nobody thinks these two on their own are stronger than the 5 Kage or all 3 Sannin. Even if you think the Raikage and B would still win, I'll also argue that the Raikage is depicted as being the stronger of the two, since he has to be the one to contain Gyuki whenever he rampages, and Killer B seems to be afraid of him all the way up until he and Naruto attempt to go and join the war. Since there's evidence that the Sannin are all roughly on the same level as the Raikage, with things like Tsunade's performance in the War Arc and the claim that Jiraiya's strength in Sage Mode surpasses the nation's, then it should be clear that Pain being so clearly above the likes of the Sannin should make it obvious that the Raikage probably isn't beating him. And then we can add Conan back into the equation and come to the conclusion that it's pretty unlikely that A and B would win here. But now we get to the last Akatsuki duo, which I've saved for last in this video because this is by far the closest fight in my opinion. B and the Raikage versus Sorcery and Deidara is an incredibly complicated fight, and in the interest of full disclosure, before I even get into it, I'm still not honestly sure I've solved this one, even with having a couple weeks to let this rattle around in my brain. So the first thing I need to address is attack power. Without a doubt, the Raikage and B are both capable of harming the artist duo. The Raikage was able to force Sasuke to throw up his Susanoo, and he was also able to punch a hole in Jugo just with his taijutsu, and so I'm inclined to say that none of Sorcery's puppets nor Deidara's face would be able to just shrug off being hit by the Raikage. As mentioned earlier, he can augment his strikes with the lightning chakra to add a sort of cutting effect to his blows, and he can already body slam people so hard that C thought that Sasuke would just outright die from being subjected to the Liger Bomb. Killer B has lightning swords as well as the executioner blade at his disposal, and if all else fails, he can also ramp up his physical strength with tailed beast chakra, or he can fully transform and unleash a Biju bomb for some major destructive power. In any case, there's nothing that I'm aware of for either Sorcery or Deidara that makes it apparent they could consistently withstand attacks on this level. They aren't necessarily going to get one shot as far as I can tell, but given that Sorcery's puppets were nothing to Sakura's fists and Shio's own puppets, and that Deidara had to substitute out of getting his face caved in by Naruto, they can't simply afford to let themselves get tagged repeatedly by A and B's attacks. On the other side of things, Sorcery's poison and Deidara's C4 both can completely negate the durability of both the Raikage and Killer B. If either of them gets poisoned or gets infected by the miniature explosives from the C4, then they'll outright be killed. Instantly in the case of C4, and over the course of several days in the case of poison. But then again, it's not like A and B don't have answers to these things, because they most certainly do. With regard to Deidara, he's in a similar boat to Kakuzu in that all of his clay-based explosives are susceptible to lightning style, something that both A and B regularly use in their fights, regardless of their opponent. This means that they both would be able to disable any bombs that Deidara has come flying their way if they can swat them from the air before they can explode. In the case of C4 again, the Raikage most likely would completely negate it, since he's more than likely going to have his lightning cloak active, which would neutralize the miniature bombs before they can even get inside of him in the first place, and Killer B might be able to resist the jutsu as well if he's already in some sort of Biju cloak, since it's possible that the C4 explosives might not be able to get past the chakra barrier and inside B's body. Of course, the end of the debate on whether Deidara could injure A and B doesn't stop there, because there's a surprising amount of nuance in how Deidara can utilize his explosive clay. For example, I mentioned earlier that the Raikage and B could cut Deidara's explosives out of the air with lightning chakra before they explode, but if Deidara notices that they're doing this, he could simply start detonating the clay right before it's in reach of the Raikage or B. Or if he has time to prepare for the fight, he could have some landmines placed, which would certainly work on these two opponents because they don't have a Sharingan with which to see the mines under the dirt. But then you'd also need to argue whether these explosives could even hurt A and B in the first place. Once again, lightning cloaks and tailed beast transformations certainly make people pretty durable. I'll go ahead and take the stance that Deidara's bombs could hurt A and B, and here's why. First off, Deidara isn't limited to only using C1 or C4, both of which still might be effective in the first place. But if he uses something as large as C3 or C0 in this fight, then A and B are likely both just gonna die. I mean, maybe B could survive if he's in full 8 Tails mode, but other than that, I have a hard time imagining that they'd be able to survive an attack that nearly leveled the entire Hidden Sand Village. And in the case of C0, it's just more of the same, though Deidara dies if he uses it, so it's more of a tie than an outright win for him. As for C1, which is the weakest variation of Deidara's clay, we did get to see that it messed up Gaara with only one successful attack, so it's possible that it could work even through A's lightning cloak and B's tailed beast chakra. I mean, it probably won't hit as hard as it did on Gaara, since I think both of their defenses are superior to the plain old sand armor, and the force of the explosions won't be getting amplified by being confined in a small enclosed space, but it should at the very least be enough to cause some damage to them through their respective armors. Then we move on to Sorcery, who I'm pretty confident is less dangerous than Deidara is here. That is, at least he's not going to do as much straightforward damage as Deidara could. The blades on his puppets simply shouldn't be strong enough to get through either the lightning cloak or the tailed beast cloak, and so he'll be relegated to attempting to either catch A or B in a cloud of poison gas, or to crush them to death with the iron sand of the third Kazekage puppet. The poison gas play actually might work, but that's really only if he catches one of them off guard, and then the iron sand is something that I'm afraid probably won't last long, since A and B both should be fast enough to avoid it and should quickly be able to destroy the puppet that controls it. With it established who can hurt who here, we need to talk about something else as well: mobility. I can't see any defense against the idea that Killer Bee and the Raikage both should be faster than their opponents here. Once again, A is one of the fastest shinobi in the whole series, and Killer Bee was too fast for Sasuke to handle on his own, this same Sasuke being superior to the one who fought Deidara, and who Deidara admitted was too fast for himself to handle in close range. But this isn't the end-all be-all of the mobility battle, since Deidara can enable both himself and Sorcery to fly, which is something that the two Cloud Ninjas can't do. If Sorcery and Deidara are able to attack from the sky, then A and B can't do much to counter this. B has the best option for retaliation since he can launch tailed beast bombs at his opponents from the ground. It's also possible that B could just pick up and throw A towards Sorcery and Deidara to attempt to get him into melee distance. Of course, neither of these are guaranteed successes since Deidara is fast enough in the air to avoid Gaara's sand and to keep pace with Onoki. This makes it possible that he might be able to dodge any Biju bombs or thrown ninja coming his way and keep raining down air superiority. All in all, this battle is going to be an extremely difficult fight since both sides have so many advantages and disadvantages. The tag team have higher raw stats and easier ways to cause straightforward damage to the artist duo, but on the other hand, the artists have many strategical and hacks advantages in their own favor. If you're on board with me that scaling in Naruto is more narrow than it appears at first glance, then this fight only gets closer. Sorcery is confirmed Kage level since he took out the third Kazekage by himself, which would without a doubt put him in the same ballpark as the Raikage, and Deidara should be somewhere around the same level as Kisame, who we've already seen go to town on Killer Bee. In terms of an outcome for this particular fight, I'm honestly not sure who wins. My gut tells me that B and the Raikage would probably take it just due to plot armor, but that's obviously not a luxury we can afford to give them in this instance, so even intuition is a non-factor for me here. The best synthesis of this battle that I can provide is this. If A and B fight Sorcery and Deidara, then it would all come down to two factors: stamina and accuracy. Starting with accuracy, since the artist duo are no mental slouches, it's reasonable to assume that they would more than likely take to the sky for the majority of this battle. In such a case, if either side can land hits on the other while avoiding what the opponent is throwing out, then they'll win. I know that sounds really simplistic, but imagine B trying to blast one of the clay birds out of the sky with a Biju bomb. Does he hit it? Can he do it consistently if he does? Then he and A would probably win. Then imagine Deidara dropping bombs on the Raikage and B. Can they dodge them? Can they avoid getting caught by multiple at once, or ones that have a large area like C3? If not, then Sorcery and Deidara would probably win. The other factor that I mentioned, stamina, comes into play if neither side can land hits on the other. In this case, it'll come down to whether Deidara can keep himself and Sorcery in the air long enough to exhaust A and B. If the fight draws out this long, then who's still fresh at this point in the battle? If it's A and B, then they'll probably be able to make short work of Sorcery and Deidara on the ground, but if it's Sorcery and Deidara, then they'll eventually be able to rain death from above onto A and B. Like I said earlier, my gut tells me that A and B would win, but I've been thinking on this for a couple weeks now, and I can still see just as many valid cases for the two Akatsuki members to come out on top here. This means that I'm actually going to turn it over to you guys to decide who's more likely to win, and tell me in the comments down below. But that's going to be all from me today. I really hope you all enjoyed this discussion, and I hope to hear from you down in the comments. I'll also hope to see you all in the next video, but until then, y'all stay safe, have a good rest of your day, and goodbye.